So today we'll have a look at the musical box samplers from Nischi. I did already a video on Susaudio and also one on Simpliciter if you're interested. Now the musical box modules might look similar, but there are a few differences, so we will look at both of them and we will start with the original one. So we have 8 slots that we can use to load samples, and actually it will load a whole folder of samples that we can sequence and manipulate. So if I right click the first slot, I can select to load a sample, open wave file, and I will load. I have here a few samples I sampled from the Basimilus. And now I can select the sample I want from the right click menu. You can see current samples. We have here the whole folder. Or we can use the next and previous buttons here, or their dedicated trigger inputs. Or we can use also pitch information or just CV that comes from your MIDI controller or any sequencer actually from this MIDI CV input. So here I have the grid sequencer. Maybe I will put this a bit here closer. I have here the grid sequencer from JW, and I can use it to trigger the samples with the gate or trigger output in this case. You can see now the samples are being triggered, and we can change, or I can use also the sequencer to change between the samples via the CV input, the MIDI CV input, just with using pitch information. So have a look here, you can see that also they are changing. Now we can either take this channel out separately from the channel outputs, or we can use the global mix outputs. Let's use, for in this case, the global mix outputs. I will just send this to the mixer. Right? And we get the samples triggered, and they are also changing according to the sequencer. So I sequence the different samples as well. Let's load another sample. In this case, it will be a sort of a bass sample, I guess. And this sample, by the way, was created by Empty Vessel for this series of videos about the Nischi samplers. So I will put links to his work in the description if you're interested to know more. And also a link to where you can download the samples he prepared for this series. So thank you, Empty Vessel, once again. Now, this sample I loaded is quite bright. Right, a sort of a bass drone. So what we can do, we can send this first to a filter. I will use Feline in this case. So if I take now the individual outputs, if I connect them to the filter, now they will not go to the master, to the main mix. So let's send this also to the main mixer here that we have. And I will close it a bit. And now I can set this sample, this channel to cycle, to loop with this button here. You can see it says here cycle. So now the sample will just continue looping. Maybe add some resonance, some drive. Right, just like this. Okay, let's load another sample. In this case, it will be a sort of a chord, I guess. And this one is also from Empty Vessel. Right, but I don't want it to play all the time. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to trigger it every few bars. So I will trigger it with a divided clock. Maybe I will also reset everything just in case. I will trigger it with a divided clock. But again, I don't want it to play the whole sample over and over again. So what we can do, we can shorten it. Here we have the start and end points or splice points. So I can just shorten this sample. Right, and now it will play up until here. By the way, it's also possible to do this with the mouse. And also, if I hold Control on the keyboard, I can drag this selection around if I want. So let's again do something like this. And now again, let's use the individual outputs. I will send this to a delay. I will use the Chronoblock 2. So I will use the outputs for this channel, for this chord, and I will sync the chronoblob with the clock, and maybe we'll use a different division, a bit more feedback. Let's listen to this. Yes. Now I want to change the note for this drone here. So what we can do, we have also a CV input here next to the octave. You can see we have CV inputs. Those CV inputs will follow 1 volt per octave, so we can use them to sequence the samples. So what we'll do, I will use ref tone in this case, which will just output constant pitch. I will set it to E, and this will go to the CV input. Yes. Right. And actually what I can do, I can also sequence this. If I use a switch, for example, I will use the switch from VCV. I can use the switch as the pitch information, and now I will say the first input will output nothing, so it will stay the original pitch, and the second input will output an E, and I will set this to 2 steps and use the same clock for the chord to change the pitch. So it's also possible to sequence the pitch of the samples. Let's also add an LFO here to the filter. We set it to slow a bit, take the frequency down, and this will modulate the filter a bit. Just to add some movement. Okay, let's add another folder. So again, right click, open WAV file in my case, and it will load the whole folder. In this case, it will be hi-hats. Now those hi-hats are quite loud. So we can use the levels here. We have volume control that we can change. But actually I want to have external control over their envelope, over the level envelope. So we have here a built-in VCA for each of the channels, for each of the samples that we can use. So I will take the level down and also the CV down for now. Let's use the AD envelope. This one is also from Nischi. Right, and I will use this to open the VCA. So now we have external control over the envelope, over the level envelope. And now what we will do this. I have here a Euclidean sequencer, I have here Eugene. So we will use this first to trigger the samples. Right, so now the samples are being triggered. I will also use it to trigger the envelope. And I will use it also to trigger the next sample, so each hit is actually a different sample. And now let's open the VCA bit. Just like this. And again, let's send this to a separate channel with some reverb. And we got all of this just from 4 slots. Another fun thing you can try is playing a sort of a progression with different samples. So here I have a folder loaded with a few notes. It's also possible to make the names a bit more visible. In the right-click menu, names more visible. Then you can see here I have a C. There are a few more notes here. There is a G, E flat, and B flat, and then it will just repeat itself. And what we can do is set this to cycle and use the end of cycle output to trigger the next sample. So here we have the end of cycle output that will output a trigger whenever the sample reaches the end. So if I set it now to cycle, and I take the end of cycle to, for example, the next trigger input, every time this sample will end, it will trigger the next sample. So let's listen to this. right? And like this, it will go through the whole progression in this folder. Again, this will load the whole folder of samples. Let's wait for it one more time. Right, now here I have on slot number 4, I have a few piano notes. Right, this is going through some delay and saturation with Debriatus. And I can randomly trigger the samples with something like a Bernoulli gate. So here I have a clock going to chances, which is a Bernoulli gate, so it will add probability to where this clock will come out of, output A or output B. So if I use output A, for example, to trigger this sample, it will be triggered every now and then, more or less randomly. Now I want that each sample will play fully and will not cut when another trigger comes in. So for example, you can see here that when the sample is playing and there's another trigger, it will reset itself. I don't want this to happen, so also for this there is an option in the right-click menu, playhead for busy mode. Busy mode means that as long as it's playing, it will play fully, and only then it can be re-triggered, which is quite helpful in this case. So now we can use again the end of cycle output, in this case to trigger sample and hold, and the sample and hold will randomly change the notes from the MIDI CV input. Again, the MIDI CV input is just a CV input that you can use more or less anything you want, not just MIDI. So now also the piano notes will change. By the way, because this is set to work with notes, so the MIDI CV input with intervals of semitones, I changed the range of the sample and hold to 0 to 1, so we have 1 octave. I have 6 samples, so 1 octave is more than enough. Let's listen to this a bit. Okay, let's move on to the Musical Box 2 module. Already you can see that we have more slots, and in the right-click menu we can activate and deactivate the file size limitation. Because we are using more slots, it's better to use smaller files, but you can experiment with larger files as well, of course. So I will load again a folder, again in the right-click menu, and already you can see that the files, all of the files in the folder got spread out through the slots. I had 8 files actually, so now we have a copy. It will repeat itself after 8 slots. So here, from here down, it's actually the same like what we have here up. And I have here a clap, a few hi-hats, 2 kicks, more hi-hats, and a rim shot, and then it will repeat itself. Now we can also change the samples in each slot if we want. In the right-click menu of the slot itself, we have available samples. Again, we can choose for each slot a different sample if we want. And this sampler is great for percussive voices and drums. So I have here the sequencer, the glitch sequencer from Vox Glitch, which will generate 8 different triggers. I can start triggering the different drums. Maybe I will also reset everything just in case. Right, so we have a whole rhythm going on. You can also again pan the different voices, left and right, and also change the levels just like before. So here we have the VCA if we want to use them. So we have all of the different controls. I will show you this also here up. I have here another one loaded with the folder. In this case, there are 16 different samples loaded. Also here I can change the length with the mouse. Again, I can change previous and next sample. We have the individual outputs, we have the octave control, the pitch control, and everything what we've seen before, cycle and so on. So something that works really nicely with this sampler is the clocked random gates from Count Modular. This will basically output random triggers in this case. I have 2 of them because again I have 16 samples. Now I have the first sample going from the individual output to a delay just to create some Karplus-Strong frogs. This sound, but everything else is going through the mix output. Right, so they are being triggered randomly. Some of them are panned. Some of them are playing in reverse, some of them are an octave up, an octave down. And I also have here the micro map from Störmelder mapped to the reverb send of this channel. So every now and then, as you can see here, there is more reverb. Okay, let's add the bass to this. I have here the Modulo sequencer sequencing kick all from Befaco as a bass. So let's just connect this to the mixer. Very nice. And of course, what I always do, I send drums through Rampage. So the drums will go to the inputs and I will use the rising outputs from both channels. This will add lots and lots of crunch to the sound. Yes. So again, this version of the musical box will work a bit differently and it's perfect for percussion and drums. Okay, here I have a sort of an end patch with the other samplers from Nisci as well. Let's start with the musical box 1 or the original musical box. What I have here, I have sample and hold modulating, as you can see from the CV inputs, the start and end points of 3 of the samples, 3 of the loops I have here. And this is going through Freq, the filter from Vult, with some modulation. So we get something a bit glitchy. Right, the loops will play different parts, sometimes longer parts, sometimes shorter parts. Then I have one of the loops going directly to the mixer, just as a background pad. Right, so this is also something you can do, modulate the starting and end points. Then here I have the musical box 2 loaded with a few different notes, percussive notes. This is going through some delay. And I have here, actually it's the same sample, but I have it 3 differently tuned. So I'm just using again the CV inputs to tune the samples differently, and I'm triggering them with the gate sequencer with quite a lot of probability. Alright, so this is the musical box 2. Then I have here Susaudio. Again, I have a video all about it. What a beautiful, beautiful sampler. I have 1 sample loaded in this case, but there are 6 different playheads you can use. So one playhead is playing the original sequence or the original loop. Another one is playing it in reverse, but just cut from here. Another one is playing just this part of the same sample, but again in reverse. Also panned left and right. create another texture. And I have here Simpliciter. Again, I have a video only about Simpliciter. Another beautiful sampler. It has splices of the sample. Those are drums, and it's playing them back randomly. And I have here, it's going to supercell in pitch shifter, time stretcher mode, so it will really change the sound. And I also have the hold here randomly activated, so it will be sort of a glitchy just like this. Right, so really lots and lots of tools if you like to work with samples, if you like sample manipulation. And that was it. Those were the musical box samplers. There is so much more to explore with them and with samples in general. Of course, again, with the other samplers from Nischi as well. I want to thank again Empty Vessel for the samples I used in these videos, and also to thank Nischi for those lovely modules. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Cheers!